I'm going to talk about Judas. Now, I want you to think, as we get into this, what comes to mind? What kind of thoughts do you have when you hear the name Judas? We're studying through the book of Mark, and I thought we'd do this. Here are the three places in the book of Mark where we read the name Judas. And I'm going to look at these in context. We'll just read these first. And then I want to go into the story of Judas. But it's in Mark 3 and verse 19. Looking at verses 14 through 19. Jesus, he ordained 12 that might be with him, that he might send them forth to preach. And then Mark lists the names of the 12 apostles. And the last one listed is Judas Iscariot, which also betrayed him. And the next place we read his name is Mark 14, verses 10 and 11. Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went into the chief priests to betray him unto them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. Remember that money as we get into this. And he sought how he might conveniently betray him. And then the third place his name is mentioned is Mark 14, 41 through 45. Jesus said to his apostles, they'd been sleeping, remember? He said, the hour is come. Behold, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise up, let us go. Lo, he that betrayeth me is at hand. And immediately while he yet spake, cometh Judas, one of the 12, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. And he that betrayed him had given them a token, saying, whomsoever I shall kiss, the same is he. Take him and lead him away safely. And as soon as he was come, he goeth straightway to him and said, Master, Master, and kissed him. Now, have you ever met anyone named Judas? Probably not. Now you could. Lori got on the internet, Google or something, and said, well, it is a name, but it's rarely used. I mean, you wouldn't want to name a child Adolf Hitler, would you? I mean, that just brings to mind things you don't want to think about when you hear his name. If you know American history, you might meet someone named Benedict and you might meet someone named Arnold, but you won't meet Benedict Arnold, would you? I mean, he betrayed the American cause during the Revolutionary War. There's certain names that just get such an association that you might have some with somebody you knew from the past that was just, well, you thought they were just awful for some reason, and you're not going to name your child after that name. It might be a fine name, but for you, that's going to bring to mind something you don't want to think about again. And so also the name Judas. But it wasn't always that way. There was a time when the name Judas was a very honored name and a very popular name. And in the New Testament, we find 7 different people named Judas. And then there's another one he's alluded to. He's a national hero. His name is not given, but there's an allusion to him in the New Testament. Let's talk about these seven, really 8 men here. To start off, you start it in Matthew chapter 1. We read in Matthew chapter 1 in verse 2, Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Judas. Did you realize that was Judas there? In the Old Testament, we know him as Judah, one of the 4th son of Jacob. There's Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah. And in the story of Joseph, right at the climax, When Joseph is about to send his brothers home and keep Benjamin for himself, the unlikely hero arises. It's Judah. In fact, he becomes the hero of the story of Joseph when he says, no, let my brother go and take me. Instead, I can't do this to my father. It'll bring down his gray head to the grave in tears. I can't do that. You take me. And that broke Joseph's heart. You remember that story? Well, later, when Jacob is blessing his sons, he says of Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. There's a play on words there. The name Judah means praise. When Joseph divided out the land of Israel, that southern portion became the tribe of Judah, known in the New Testament as Judea. It became such a dominant tribe. The descendants of Judah became so dominant that all of the Israelites came to be called Jews. That's the reason they're called Jews, Judah. So a very honored name. No wonder people were named Judas in the New Testament. That was an honored name. We read about Judas Maccabees. Now, he's not in the Bible, but he's in history. In that period between the Testaments, the Seleucid Greeks had defiled the temple and turned it into a pagan temple. And Judas of the Maccabees rose up in rebellion against them and threw them out. They reclaimed the Jerusalem. They rededicated the temple, and they won for Israel their independence that existed right up into the time of the New Testament. And so Judas of Maccabees, a national hero. Well, you don't read his name in the New Testament, but you read about the Feast of Dedication. In John 10, 22 through 38, and I'm going to read all that, but it was at Jerusalem in the Feast of the Dedication, and it was winter, as Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. That word dedication, you go back to the Grecian Hebrew name back there for dedication. That's where we get the word Hanukkah. Hanukkah. That's what the Jews celebrate to this day. When they do, they're calling to mind that national hero, Judas of Maccabees. This is the time when Jesus said, I and my Father are one, and they took up stones ready to stone him. But he escaped. But that was the Feast of Dedication, that ancient feast that today is celebrated as Hanukkah. There's Judas, Lebbaeus, Thaddeus. 3 names for this one individual. We read about him in Matthew 10 in verse 3. Lebbaeus, whose surname is Thaddeus. But when Luke lists the apostles, instead of Lebbaeus or Thaddeus, he lists him as Judas, the brother of James. So there are 2 Judases that were among the 12 apostles. And in John chapter 14 and verse 22, it talks about this Judas, but it mentions him, said Judas, now not Iscariot. That's a different Judas. And his name is listed in Acts chapter 1 and verse 13. When the 11 remaining disciples had gathered together in the upper room with 120, they're waiting for the coming of the Holy Spirit that Jesus promised, and they're together in prayer. And as it lists those 12 apostles, it lists Judas among them. That's the last we read of him. And there's Judas, the Lord's brother. Jesus had 4 brothers and at least 2 sisters, maybe more. Matthew 13, 54 through 56. When he was coming to his own country, he taught them in their synagogue, inasmuch as they were astonished and said, which hath this man this wisdom and these mighty works? Is not this the carpenter's son? That's referring to Joseph. Is not his mother called Mary, and his brethren, James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? Now that's not Judas the apostle. You see, his brothers didn't believe on him while he was alive. They later did. It said his sisters, are they not all with us? Which hath this man these things? It's like he goes back to Nazareth and says, why, this can't be the Messiah. We know his brothers, as though that somehow meant he couldn't be the Messiah. But Judas, the brother of our Lord, and we know him better as Jude, the man that wrote the book of Jude. Now, you might meet someone named Jude. You probably won't meet someone named Judas. Judas of Galilee. The apostles are on trial, and they're ready to put them to death. And Gamaliel says, now, wait, let's don't overreact to this. You remember Judas, how he tried to rise up some to rebel, and you know what became of him? And then there was also this man rose up, Judas of Galilee. Well, he was in the days of taxing. He drew away much people after him. He also perished, and all, even as many as obeyed him, were dispersed. History tells us this Judas of Galilee, when Jesus was a young man, this is before his baptism, is when this thing occurred in Galilee. This Judas was crucified. Jesus knew what a crucifixion was, didn't he? And so there's a Judas of Galilee. There's another Judas of Damascus. Saul, persecuting the church. Before he's known as Paul the Apostle, he's Saul the persecutor. He's on the road to Damascus, and he saw a great light, and he looked up, and it was the Lord. And the Lord told him to go in Damascus. It'll be told thee what thou must do. And when the light went away, he was blind. He could not see. And he went and was led by hand into the city of Jerusalem. And the Lord came to Ananias, told him, you go see Saul. I'll tell you his address. He's on the street called Straight. They say you can go to Damascus and still walk down the street called Straight. And somewhere along that street was the house of one called Judas. He had taken Paul in. That's where Paul was when he's fasting and praying. That's where Saul was. I'll call him Saul for now. That's where Saul was when Ananias said, arise and be baptized and wash away thy sins, calling on the name of the Lord. He's in the house of Judas. And there's Judas Barsabas. He was a prophet in the New Testament church. We read about him in Acts chapter 15. He must have been held in great esteem among the church. It says it pleased the apostles and elders with the whole church to send chosen men of their own company to Antioch with Paul and Barnabas, namely Judas, surnamed Barsabas. That'd be like a family name, sort of like a last name. And send him and Silas, chief men among the brethren, and they wrote letters by them. And so we read in Acts 15:32, Judas and Silas being prophets. So there was a Judas that was a prophet in the New Testament church and exhorted the brethren with many words and confirmed them. And then there's Judas Iscariot. But what I wanted to impress upon you was the great honor given to that name. That's just one of the names you would name someone. I'm going to name him Judas. That'll be an honorable name in Israel. But not since Judas Iscariot. This name Iscariot, what does that mean? You look in the American Standard Version, and his father is called Simon Iscariot. And there's a little textual difference between the text the King James American Standard translated from. So Jesus said, verily I say unto you, it's one of you that shall betray me. That's when he's at the Last Supper. He for whom I shall dip the sop and give it to him. And when he dipped the sop, he taketh and giveth it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Now, you may not have heard of Simon Iscariot. It said, then having received the sop, he went out straightway, and it was night. Does that mean that was their last name? Well, I'm Bill Boyd, my father James Boyd, because Boyd's the last name. Was that his last name? Probably not. There were so many Judases during that day that they would give them some kind of surname, some kind of tag to distinguish them from the other Judases of that day. Iscariot. Now, there seems to be a little uncertainty here as to why he would be tagged Iscariot, but generally there's a little village way south of Jerusalem in southern Judea called Kerioth. And the idea generally presented is that his name is Judas Iscariot. Well, that sounds like Iscariot, doesn't it? Ish, that means a man. Judas, a man of Kerioth. And so, just like others would be named, not just for their name, but the name and the place they're from would be tagged to their name, so that they would be distinguished from people with that name from other places. So Judas, a man of Kerioth. And if that is so, which seems to me it would be so, Judas is the only one of the 12 apostles that was not from Galilee. Kind of interesting, isn't it? Well, John 20. That should be verses 4 through 6. We read, then saith one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray him. This has to do with a woman that took that alabaster box of ointment and broke it and anointed Jesus shortly before he was crucified. And some of the apostles were saying, well, why should she have taken that expensive ointment? She could have sold that and given it to the poor. It was Judas that was leading the apostles in saying that. And it says here, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? But this he said, now notice, not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and had the bag and bear what was put therein. See how the money enters into this? Judas is the one that kept the bag, kept the money bag for the apostles. Now, some have speculated this. It's speculation, but it's kind of interesting. It may fit. Why would Judas have betrayed Jesus? Some thought, well, maybe he'd taken money from that bag, and he thought, here's a way I could get that money back. Put it in, they'll never know I got it. Now, that could have been the case. But it has something to do with money because he's a thief. John 13 and verse 2. The supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Where did he get the idea to betray Jesus? Well, the devil put it in his heart. Now, how the devil did that, I don't know. But when we're tempted to do evil, we're tempted of Satan. And so he received what the devil offered him. Judas put it in his own heart. Luke describes it this way in Luke 22, verses 3 through 6. Then entered Satan into Judas. That's what it means for Satan to enter you. I mean, you're letting the devil put something in your heart that shouldn't be there. Then entered Satan into Judas, surnamed Iscariot, being of the number of the 12. And he went his way and communed with the chief priests and captains how he might betray him unto them. And they were glad and covenanted to give him money. And he promised and sought opportunity to betray him unto them in the absence of the multitude. You see the money coming into this? Matthew 14, 41 through 54, what we read earlier. When Judas betrayed Jesus, the hour is come. Behold, the Son of Man is betrayed in the hands of sinners. Rise up, let us go. He that betrayeth me is at hand. And immediately while he spake, cometh Judas, one of the 12, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves from the chief priests and scribes and elders. And he that betrayed him had given them a token, saying, Whomsoever I shall kiss, that same is he. Take him and lead him away safely. And as soon as he was come, he goeth straightway to him and said, Master, Master, and kissed him. It's proverbial, isn't it? The kiss of Judas. Someone pretending to be your friend and betraying you. The kiss of Judas. Well, here's what happened. Matthew 27, 3 through 5. Then Judas, which would betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself. What was Judas thinking? How could he do such a thing? He had seen all these things Jesus had done, and yet he betrayed him with a kiss. And so there's another speculation that people will offer. Well, maybe Judas thought Jesus wouldn't let him take him. Maybe he knew Jesus was more powerful. I'll get the money. Jesus will chase him off. He was always able to escape. He escaped that stoning earlier. But it didn't work out that way. He let himself be arrested and condemned. And when he saw that, it says he repented himself and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priest and elders, saying, I have sinned, and I have betrayed the innocent blood. And they said, what's that to us? See thou to that. And he cast the pieces of silver down in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. When I was at Jerusalem, standing in the ancient city of David, the guide pointed to us the valley they call the Valley of Gehenna. He said, down under that bluff there, down in that valley, is the potter's field that they purchased with the 30 pieces of silver. And you could see how that you take a tree growing at the top of that bluff, hang yourself out on that tree. What could happen? You could fall from that tree down into that potter's field, and then what would happen? Well, here's what happened. Acts 1 and verse 18. Now this man purchased a field with a reward of iniquity. That is not a good reward, is it? The reward of iniquity. And falling headlong, he burst in the midst, and his bowels gushed out. And then Luke tells us a little later, in Acts 1 and verse 25, Judas, by transgression, fell, that he might go to his own place. And that's the last we read of Judas. What a terrible story. Well, that's why you're not going to probably won't ever meet anyone named Judas. A name once honored, and one man by his treachery destroyed the good feelings people would have associated with that name. And now, you know, don't name the child Judas. Don't name them something different than that. The power that sin can have over us is unimaginable, isn't it? How could Judas do that? Money has something to do with it. Paul would later write to Timothy that the love of money is the root of all evil. And here Judas was, he had given up all to follow Christ, but kind of like Lot's wife, he looks back. And the things of this world can be so distracting that we forget the greater spiritual things and trade them off for temporary passing worldly things. Like the parable of the sower, where the cares of this world choke out what you could become. We'll spend so much time chasing after money, chasing after what it can give us, chasing after material things that like Demas, who Paul said he loved the present world and has forsaken me. As close an association as Judas had with Jesus, and yet he let the material things take him away. I'm reminded of what Paul wrote to the Corinthians, "Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall." We live in a material world. We need material things to survive. And material things are given to us as a blessing and a pleasure so we can enjoy this life. But if we lose focus and think that life is about the material, then we lose our eternity with Christ. The spiritual must always override. So let Judas serve as the warning. We invite you every time we meet to come to Jesus, be baptized into Christ. If you let your life be taken over by other things, then to come forward and repent. We can pray for you that you can be restored. You need to respond. Do so as we stand and sing.